Give me a minute. I want to respond to Craig's comment here. In a multi-part comment, Craig tells me to stop talking rubbish about Russia, that if Russia are such jerks and can't do anything right, how come Ukraine hasn't won? I mean, it's never ending, and you show us how bad Russia is, but it goes on. Cut the crap. Fair enough. Let's talk about it a little bit. Why does it go on when the Russians are so bad, are so incompetent, and continue to fuck up the way that they do? Why does it go on? Well, if you take a look at the map up there, right now, this is Google Maps, and I brought it out as big as I could so you could see both Ukraine and Russia. And you can't. I can't get it on the phone, right? Because Russia is so big. It is the largest country on earth. It is one of the largest extractors of oil and natural gas and fossil fuels. It has 2% of the world's population, but it has an economy that has historically been about 4% of global GDP, as opposed to Ukraine, which has had at the beginning of the war 40 million people. 7 million of them are currently refugees outside the country, and another 7 million are displaced internally. That's 1 in 3 Ukrainians who have lost everything. Who have lost everything. Many of them. With 140 million people against a country of 40 million people, this thing should have been over just like they planned it to be over in 3 days. Because not only is Russia with its 11 time zones, so I couldn't even fit it all on the screen, and get Ukraine in the little Ukraine over there, see him? With its 11 time zones, it's also the inheritor of the USSR. It put itself in a position, which it had no business doing, by the way, of being the inheritor of the USSR. And the USSR was a superpower. Remember, the USSR was never one country. It was 15 Soviet socialist republics, and 14 of them became their own independent nations, including Ukraine. And when when the Soviet Union fell, nations like Ukraine returned back to Russia many, many things, not just the nuclear weapons, but a lot of the armaments, a lot of tanks, a lot of other equipment, right? It all went back to Mother Russia. And Mother Russia took it all, everything that they could get, and then continued to try to squeeze these other nations, which is why we see such a movement to get away from Russia in the former Soviet republics, Armenia being and Kazakhstan being the most recent to turn their backs on Moscow and start to move away from Moscow. So, gosh, Craig, I'm sorry the war isn't going quite as fast as you'd like it to go, pal. But it's a war. It's not a movie. A nation of 140 million people with 4% of the global GDP against a country of 40 million, where 1 in 3 have been displaced from their homes, and a percent of GDP that's less than 1%. Fighting off these guys. Yeah, it's going to take a while. Now, I have often said on this channel, do not confuse my enthusiasm for Ukrainian successes with that meaning that it's going to be a short war. No, it's not going to be a short war. And it's not going to be a short war because Russia's got deep pockets. Yeah, they're down 165 billion in oil and gas revenues this year, but they're still bringing in the money, boy. Yes, they are. But it is not an endless supply. It's not. And it's showing all the time. The Soviet reserves, how does Russia keep fighting this war when their losses on the battlefield are so extraordinary? Let's talk about it for a second. On the subject of men, to the best of our knowledge, 325,000, that's a third of the Ukrainian army, have been taken off the battlefield, either KIA or WIA, wounded, killed in action or wounded in action. 325,000 men. Do you have any idea how many men the United States lost in Afghanistan in 20 years? Just over 3,000. That's 100 times the loss in just less than 2 years, in less than a tenth of the time. And they absorb it. And they just keep mobilizing more bodies because they got 140 million people to choose from, and they do not care. The Ukrainians care. They've only got 40 million. And so their losses are a fifth of what the Russians have, but they're still dying. The men and women of the Ukrainian armed forces are out there right now in the trenches, dying to preserve the sovereignty of this nation and their freedom. Tell me. Now let's look at hardware. Hardware losses for the Russians are 3-1. Now the Ukrainians have the whole world, 140 nations, contributing to their equipment. Good, because we're going to need it, right? Because the Russians have the inheritance of the Soviet Union to draw on. And they're drawing it down, boy. They are effectively demilitarizing themselves. The Japanese have told us that the air defenses on the Kuril Islands are gone, taken to Ukraine. The Finns report that the air defenses along the Finnish border are gone, taken to Ukraine. The UK intelligence tells us that Kaliningrad has been demilitarized, basically. Everything that was in Kaliningrad has been sent to Ukraine on IL-76s. The Russian base in Armenia, stripped bare, everything put on trains and sent to Ukraine. That's why it continues. It continues because Russia has deep pockets. And gosh, I'm sorry the Ukrainians aren't dying quite as fast as you'd like them to. Child. Now, the Ukrainians, for their part, and the reason why I am so enthusiastic for every one of their successes is because it's impossible. What they're doing is impossible. And they get up and they do it every day. For their mothers, for their sisters, for their sons. So don't tell me that I'm full of shit. I can see. And I see the sacrifices every day. I see them every day, pal. And there is nobody on this earth that has more respect for what the Ukrainians have done and keep doing. They have done so much with so little for so long. They are now capable, I believe, of doing anything with nothing. In the face of this giant, this is a David and Goliath battle, and it is not easy, and it is not a fucking movie. Please, there's 1,000 voices on TikTok. Go watch somebody else.